Here's what's coming up on episode 93 of the Big Seance podcast. Jenniffer Weigel.
I did reach out to probably about 15 different medium psychics and healers, and the 8 that are in there not only agreed to do it, but they also agreed to my bringing with me a stranger to the encounter that they would have to read as well. A stranger to them, not to me. So I would surprise them with, a friend and not give them any details about who that friend was ahead of time. And I texted Michael and I said, "Where are you right now?" And he wrote back, "In your back seat."
Oh my gosh.
It was very creepy. Thomas John has a funny answer about that. He's like, God loves Sylvia Browne, but she would say with absolute truth that there were these libraries and this is what they looked like, and giant towers and these gold books and all this stuff. And it's like, how do you know? And he told me that the guides tell him that love and fear cannot coexist. They simply can't. They're in different floors of the building. I mean, it's not possible. They're different vibrations. I'm a storyteller, and the venue changes. Sometimes it's on the radio, and sometimes it's on TV, and sometimes it's on stage, and sometimes it's in my writing. But I love to tell stories and move people through stories.
Welcome to the Big Seance podcast. I'm Patrick Keller of BigSeance.com, and this is a place for an open discussion on all things paranormal, but specifically topics like ghosts and hauntings, paranormal research, spirit communication, psychics and mediums, and life after death. So basically, anything that pops up in my paranormal world. The candles are already lit, so you might as well come on in and join the seance. Can I tell you a little story? I shared this just the other day in the Big Seance Parlor on Facebook. I had just finished watching the first episode of the new season of Hollywood Medium while having some lunch on my first true day of summer. I've mentioned several times how much I love Tyler Henry and would love to have him on the show sometime. Well, Tyler's last reading in the episode I was watching was for Bobby Browne, who Tyler didn't even recognize. Well, both Whitney Houston, who was Bobby's ex-wife, and their daughter, Bobby Christina, came through in Tyler's reading, but Tyler didn't know that's who they were. The moment was so moving, and seeing Bobby's face as the validation was coming through, it was cool. But here's the thing. Tyler is this young kid, and since he didn't recognize Bobby Browne, he didn't make the connection between him and Whitney. Then I got to see Tyler get blown away when it was revealed who the souls were who came through. Bobby was really emotional, and you could tell he was touched, and they had a big bear hug before Tyler left. Now you can say, well, that's a production and things are edited and it's just too predictable that Tyler was kept in the dark and that Whitney and Bobby Christina came through. But all I can say is I've always really felt like Tyler is genuine, and I think the show does a great job. Well, back to my story. After the episode, I got up to go into the kitchen and I woke up my iPhone, picked it up, and my Apple Music app was open, which I rarely use. It's usually my podcast app that pops up. But sometimes when a podcast is finished and my phone goes to sleep, when I wake it up, the first thing that opens up is my Apple Music, even though I wasn't using it. It's really weird. Whitney Houston's beautiful face was smiling at me, and One Moment in Time began playing. I hadn't listened to that song in probably a few years, and I haven't used Apple Music long, and so I'd certainly never listened to it there. The day she crossed over, I blogged about what her work and her music meant to me as a musician and lover of music. The title of that blog post was One Moment in Time my favorite Whitney Houston song. My kids at school even sang it beautifully the year after she died. Thank you, Whitney. Today, I bring you my interview with award-winning broadcast journalist and author Jenniffer Weigel on her most recent book, Psychics, Healers, and Mediums, a journalist, a road trip, and voices from the other side. Later, Tim Prossel has a new spectral edition. I've got some shout-outs and lots of great listener feedback, and I'll even tell you how you can win a copy of Jennifer's book, which you're going to learn about right now. Jenniffer Weigel is an award-winning broadcast journalist based in Chicago. She won an Emmy for her on-camera reporting for CBS and has also worked for ABC, NBC, WGN, TV and radio, and WLS radio. She's also worked as a reporter and columnist for the Chicago Tribune. For over 20 years, Jenniffer has interviewed and investigated mediums, psychics, and healers. She became particularly interested in this topic after the death of her father in 2001. In her provocative new book, which I just read, Psychics, Healers, and Mediums, a journalist, a road trip, and voices from the other side, Weigel interviews today's top medium, psychics, and healers, and she puts them to the test. She has a podcast and even a regular speaker series. I think that's how I'd refer to it as, both of which we'll hit on a little bit later. And her website is jenweigel.com, and that's JenWeigel.com. Jenniffer, we have a nerdy thing here where you have to imagine, we're sitting in a seance parlor right now.
Fabulous. And
I get to ask you what you would like to drink in the seance parlor today.
Ooh. Is it non-alcoholic only?
Oh, we're adults, so you could...
Okay. You know what? I think I'll do a tea. Let's do a green tea. That sounds very, very calming.
Awesome. Well, I have to tell you, as a school teacher, and this is the last week of school, when you said alcohol, my ears perked up. So that would have been fine as well.
Yeah, we'll go with green tea.
Okay, cool. Tea, here you go. And I'm going to have my coffee here. And before, speaking of the coffee and everything, before we really dig into your work and your book, I just have to say, and I think I've told you this, I'll speak to the audience. Jenniffer recently interviewed Dr. Ian Smith on her podcast, I'm Spiritual, Damn It. No, really, that's what it's called. It's cool. You should check it out. We'll talk about the podcast later, but one of the things they talked about on this particular episode was sugar addiction. And it really affected me. And since the day I heard that episode, and things don't hit me like this very often, especially when it comes to diet and things like that. It takes a while with me. But since the day I heard it, which was over 2 weeks ago, I've been completely off of soda, artificial sweeteners, and for the most part, sugar. And it's a big problem for me. My listeners know that usually when I offer drinks in the parlor here, I have coffee with Splenda and a lot of Splenda. And so I'm a Splenda addict. And so once again today, instead of my Splenda, my coffee is sweetened with honey. I'm hoping that's a good alternative.
Perfect. That is a much better choice. No chemicals. You go.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really proud of myself, and what I've been telling everybody is I'm so surprised, like, I haven't died. Like, I didn't expect it to work.
You're adding years to your life.
I hope. In a recent interview, you made a joke about being the Angie's List of psychics and mediums, and it made me chuckle because in a way, even though my little podcast is just my after-school passion, we both talk to a lot of mediums. What did you mean by that?
I bet we could compare notes with our Rolodex. People will call me Patrick, and they'll say, ugh, I need a good psychic. And I'll say, well, wait a minute. What's your issue? I mean, are you stuck? Or do you just want to talk to your dead dad? Are you grieving? You know, you might need a past life regression. Like, let's get specifics here. You don't just go to anybody because everyone, as you know, is so different.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to think that because I've spent so much time with so many dozens of these people, and I know sort of what they have to offer, and, you know, some really do just want to tell you what they think your guides want you to know about your future. And some really just want to connect to the other side and give evidential circumstances. Basically say, like, I have your dad here, he's saying this, or I have your uncle here and he's holding a glass of whiskey. Or, you know, to me, that's a little less exciting because I already know that we can contact our loved ones on the other side.
Mm-hmm.
So to hear that my granny is standing there with her, you know, box of muffins, while I love my granny, I don't know that that's going to get me past the part that's, you know, bothering me about work, you know?
Right.
So I think because of all that, you know, I got a lot of people in the Rolodex, just like you do.
Yeah. And what's cool about your book that we'll talk more about later for sure is I've not interviewed any of the mediums that you covered in the book. And so that's mediums to add to my Rolodex, you know?
Oh, great. I'll connect you. How cool is that?
Yeah. You know, I've known about many of them, or a few of them for sure. But yeah, so that totally gives me some information to run on, some homework.
Excellent. Which one did you like?
You know what? I'm fascinated by the Boudin family and the fact that there are so many of them. And you just, I love that you have a whole chapter just on, what'd you call it? The other Boudins?
Yeah, the other Boudins aren't so happy that they're called the other Boudins. You know, there's ex-Boudin, who is the oldest sibling, and she, you know, at the age of 17, noticed her gift of hands-on healing and psychic ability, and then Michael was 7 at the time, and Nikki was about 13 or 14, and she didn't want anything to do with this stuff. She just ran in the other direction and didn't embrace her gifts until she was in her 40s. But yeah, to have a psychic family like that, and their mother, May Boudin, was super psychic, and it hit her in her 40s. So they're still in Minnesota. They love Minnesota. I have been up there several times to visit the whole dang family, and I love that they each have a different skill set, like we were talking about earlier. You know, Michael just wants to talk to people about the opportunities that our dead people want us to take, basically. They are sitting there chomping at the bit, hoping that we just take the risk and go, or apply for that job, or, you know, just really go for it. So he's a future guy, he says. And then Nikki just wants to talk to the medium stuff. You know, she just wants to talk to your loved ones on the other side. And then Echo is sort of a mixed bag. She does hands-on healing, and she also does past life things. Like if you're stuck on some thing, some relationship, some dynamic in your life, whether it's a spouse or a best friend, and you're just always tangling with them, chances are you've had past lives with them where you're working out some karma. And she just goes right for that stuff. And I find all of them fascinating in very different ways.
Can you imagine them all in one room at Thanksgiving?
Actually, I said that after we went to visit them. I called a producer friend of mine and I said, I want to be at their house on Thanksgiving. So we actually have been filming a documentary on this family.
Oh my gosh.
They are such a hoot. Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
So much fun.
Can't wait to hear more about that. Yeah, I've known a little about Echo. I've read one of her books based on a recommendation by Chip Coffey. Do you know Chip Coffey? And,
of course. Yeah,
and he raves about Echo Boudin and how she has been an inspiration to him. So probably Echo's the one I knew the most about before the book.
Yeah, she's fabulous. I mean, she's, got 8, 9, 10, 11 books, something like that. She's, no schlub.
Yeah. Can you tell us about the events in your life that sparked an interest in intuitives and mediums?
Well, the first one that I experienced was when I was in my mid-20s, and a friend said to me, you got to come see this lady out in Rockford in the middle of nowhere, Rockford, Illinois, at a farmhouse. And I was like, what? She said, yeah, she's a psychic. She's really good, So we trekked out to the, farmhouse in Rockford, this friend of mine, and she promised me that she didn't say anything about me ahead of time. And I write about this actually in my first book, Stay Tuned, because it was my first encounter. And she knew so much stuff that at that time there was no Google. I mean, Google had yet to be invented, and it would have taken some serious digging to find a lot of the stuff that she brought up, but some of it was impossible to find. And it was the dynamic of my current relationship, all sorts of things. So the fact that my grandmother's rings had been lost, it was really, really cool. And I'm a journalist at heart, so I didn't really know that it was true. I just kept wondering how the heck it happened. So it definitely piqued my curiosity. And after that, I ended up bringing my dad with me. I told my dad about it, and my dad, also a journalist at the time, was like, I never expected him to say, yeah, let's take a road trip. But he did. So we get in the car and drive out there, and he wants to talk to his mom. So this woman, Denise Gazzardo is her name. She's also a psychic, and she can do mediumship if she has an item of somebody who's passed. So they call that, right, psychometry.
Mm-hmm.
So we brought a piece of jewelry of my grandmother, and my dad wanted to connect to her because she'd been gone a decade, but my dad still wept. He wept every time her name came up. He would weep at commercials just thinking about her. So we sent, we went in the car and got in the car and did a road trip, and there we were. And so as we sat down with Denise, it was really powerful. She mentioned my dad's stress levels were at an all-time high because of a kitchen renovation, which again was true, not something you can Google.
Mm-hmm.
And she just continued to make us go, whoa. And so after that, I think this next encounter I had, it had been a couple years, and I was working for Danny Bonaducci, the Partridge Family guy.
Mm-hmm.
He had a radio show in Chicago, and I did his news for a while. And he had on some psychic that was talking about how Danny had a relative that had died, but the circumstances around the death was still questionable. And they didn't really know the deal. But what this psychic said was that she lost her balance and fell out the window. And Danny told me that off mic, that's actually what they suspected, because she had taken too much medication and lost her balance when she was staying by the window and fell out of the window and died. I mean, just terrible. Mm. So anyway, that was, again, I was like, and she said to me, oh, your grandmother's here and she loves that you wear her rings. And I thought, everybody's got a dead grandma. And everyone's probably got a dead grandma's rings. So again, I was like, no.
It happens. You start going through these things in your head.
Right. And that's because I think, the skeptical journalist was taking front and center stage. And then I met with James Van Praagh, and he came.
Oh, jealous.
Yeah. So great. He came for an interview in my condo. I mean, I'll never forget this. He came to Chicago. I was the only TV interview that would interview him. This was when he was promoting the book Reaching to Heaven, after Talking to Heaven. And my bosses at CBS were really apprehensive about doing anything with the guy. But I said, look, he's a New York Times bestselling author, because Talking to Heaven was a New York Times bestselling book. And that was the only reason they agreed to it. So we sit down, and he starts bringing through stuff about my father-in-law at the time that was just mind-boggling. And he had just recently passed. And apparently he had changed the will to benefit the family, but nobody knew this. So when I took the VHS tape, because that's how long ago this was, the VHS tape to my mother-in-law for her to watch, she was so blown away. She actually got up and she walked into the bedroom and shut the door and didn't come out. I was like, well, hi. So anyway, after that, I was really like, wait a minute. And my mother-in-law, very, very Catholic, used to joke with me that I was going straight to hell for doing these interviews anyway. And it was just really wild, because the next time I went to go visit my mother-in-law, she had all of James Van Praagh's books on her nightstand.
Inspiration.
Yeah. So I think that's really what sort of tipped it for me. But then it was just a quiet passion. It was like, I'd go to this Transitions Bookshop, which is a great bookstore in Chicago. May it rest in peace. Unfortunately, it's no longer here. But I used to go and get a book and then go home and go back to my news job, which was, my daily grind. And when my dad died of a brain tumor, I just decided life is too short, and he was only 56. And I wanted to go out and do some research and start digging, because it bothered me that only a few of my colleagues would even understand that there might be something to this. They just discounted it without even giving it a second thought. And now there's so much evidence in the scientific community embracing, the electromagnetic field and all the things that are possible with these sort of messages. Mm-hmm. It's really cool just to see how we've progressed just since that time when my dad died 16 years ago. So I keep on questing.
So you didn't have any, I get so jealous of people that are, what I call paranerds. now and people who are into the paranormal, when I hear that they were into this stuff as a child or they had experiences as a child or things like that. Did you have any inkling as a child that you would be fascinated by all of this stuff now?
Well, when I was a kid, I guess it was an intuition that was so strong that my stomach hurt all the time. So I was taking in, I am told now by a bunch of healers, I was taking in information in my second chakra. It was like my antenna. So I would walk into a room and I would get a stomach ache or I would feel excited. It would all be gauged in my stomach. And so if I met somebody with ill intentions, I would feel it in my stomach. If I met somebody who was really cool and fun, I would get excited in my stomach. And so my parents were going through a divorce and it was trauma all the time. And I would be able to, when I was walking home, I could feel blocks before I got home, like, uh-oh, there's trouble at home.
Wow.
Like, you don't want to go home now, that kind of thing. So my antenna was definitely up. And so my mom took me to the pediatrician at the time, because what else do? You take your kid to the doctor if she complains about a stomachache all day long.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll never forget it. The doctor, I heard them talking right outside the door, and he said, I think she's just making this up for attention. So see if she'll, ask her to journal about it. And then if she continues to complain about it, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, kind of thing. And I was so disappointed. So I just decided to keep it quiet. So I shut down whatever kind of intuition I had at the time and just decided not to listen to it. But I also remember a couple of times, like in 7th grade, I remember when the teacher walked into the classroom, I knew exactly what she was thinking and I knew exactly what she was going to say. And she said exactly what my thought was.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, oh no, I don't know if I like this party trick. It was like, wow.
Yeah, that could probably get you in trouble, that trick.
Yes, exactly. But, it did come back when I was a journalist. It came in handy as far as what sources I could really trust. And when I was following a story, I would just get quiet and think to myself, all right, now, which person do I want to call? Who would be the best lead for me to go with? And I mean, every time I went with my gut, I was always right. And that's the thing. I got into this argument with a guy at a conference. It was this journalism conference called Images and Voices of Hope in upstate New York, where I was asked to be a speaker. And journalists from around the world came. I mean, it was so cool. We had an anchor woman from Sweden and an anchor woman from Israel, and all these people gathered at this conference. And this guy who was a professor of journalism somewhere on the East Coast, I don't remember because I didn't like the guy at all. He got up there and he told the room, never go with your gut. Your gut always lies. And I was like, excuse me? I mean, I almost tackled him. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. And he is busy teaching journalism somewhere, telling everyone to shut down their gut because the gut is not a fact. And I couldn't disagree with him more.
Wow.
Yeah.
So tell us a little more about the book. I mean, what prompted you to do this, road trip and I guess it kind of also goes along with your speaker series, right? Conversations with Weigel. How does all of this happen? And
how does this all connect?
And how did you pick the psychics and the mediums and all of that?
Well, it's interesting because I did reach out to probably about 15 different medium psychics and healers. And the 8 that are in there not only agreed to do it, but they also agreed to my bringing with me a stranger to the encounter that they would have to read as well. A stranger to them, not to me. So I would surprise them with, a friend and not give them any details about who that friend was ahead of time. And you'd be amazed at how some people were not comfortable with that, and that made me wonder why. Mm-hmm. So those people that weren't comfortable with it, then they weren't in the book. A couple of other people have, schedules that conflicted. The Long Island medium couldn't be in it because she had a book deal of her own and isn't allowed to be featured in any book other than hers, and that was fine. But I found the Manhattan medium who was just a laugh riot. I mean, I was traveling with the Manhattan medium to answer your question on why this book. We were doing a couple of shows. We went to the Wisconsin Dells, honest to goodness, the water park capital of the world. But in January, no water parks are really happening in January. So we go up there, and I mean, I'm telling you, 300 people clamored into this theater to talk to Thomas. And the stories of the different, messages that came through for someone's prize show cow. And, it was so random. And it's open seating. So when Thomas points right at the person in the fourth row and says, your daughter Claire is here, people gasp everywhere because how the heck, well, he's a medium. He's talking to Claire, and Claire says, this is my mom. And so that's why he knows where to go. But for some people, that was just really, hard for them to understand. But we were doing all these shows. So we did a show in Chicago at the Victory Garden Theater, which is a wonderful space. We're going back there on Monday, June 12th, actually. And then we were up in the Dells, and we were just bopping around. And I thought, this experience, this road trip is so hilarious and full of information and hope and, obstacles and drive-throughs. And I just thought, this is interesting. What if I went around the country and did this with a bunch of different medium psychics and healers? So I basically pitched my editor the idea. I said, look, this is what I've been doing. I would like to do it on a broader scale. And here's some of the people I'm thinking of covering. What are your thoughts? And he was like, I love the idea. Let's present it to the rest of the board and see what they think. And so I cranked out a couple of chapters very quickly on Thomas John, who I already had, the encounters with, and then Carolyn Mays, who I interviewed at the Wilmette Theater, and she wrote the best-selling book, Anatomy of the Spirit and Sacred Contracts. She's a medical intuitive. So I cranked out those sample chapters. They loved them, and they were like, we want more. So that's a good sign. And then we picked the other people, and that's how it was born.
I think one of my favorite parts that sticks out, and I forgot who exactly was texting you, but you and a friend were on the road trip, and you got some texts that really creeped you out or something because of how accurate it was, or it was some telepathy or something going on.
Okay, so we were coming back from Minneapolis, and my friend Lisa was driving, and Lisa is like an executive coach for businesses. She's not a medium stalker, you know what I'm saying? It was a lot to take her to come to visit a couple of mediums but she did lose her father when she was just 13 years old. So I thought she would be a good candidate. She was open to the experience, but she wasn't, banging the drum and going to psychic fairs. And she wasn't a complete cynic. So it was a perfect combination. And we were driving back, and she kept looking in the rearview mirror, and she's like, I keep seeing something in the back seat. And I said, what do you mean? And I looked back there, and she's like, I just saw a face. I'm not kidding you. And I was like, ugh. And then I felt like my right shoulder get goosed, and then she felt her left shoulder get goosed, and we were like, ah! We're about to crash, we're pulling over. And I thought, oh, Michael. So Michael Boudin, one of the stories that he tells in his book is
Michael.
that he can astral travel. And we can all do this, apparently, and a lot of us do it while we're sleeping. Our body's shut down, and we're going somewhere. And so he has the ability to do it, when other people don't. And I texted Michael, and I said, where are you right now? And he wrote back, in your back seat.
Oh, my gosh.
It was very creepy.
My bladder would have been gone.
My new psychic friends. I don't know how I feel about this.
I have a question. Do you, this is kind of me getting honest here, since we talk to a lot of mediums and have similar nerdiness. Do you ever feel guilt when you're, for lack of a better word, testing a medium, or maybe having critical thoughts in your head, like we've talked a little bit earlier, or even like full-blown doubt even, maybe? Because I do, when you're testing them in your brain. Do you ever feel guilt?
You have guilt over it? I think it's just human nature. You know what? I don't come at this with a frown on my face anymore. I now walk into it thinking, look, we use 5% of our brain on a good day, so I'm open to whatever happens here, and let's see what takes place. Now, if I notice a psychic or a medium start fishing, where they're like, does the name Michael mean anything to you? And it's kind of like, well, it could, I have a friend from high school named Michael, or I interviewed a psychic named Michael, or, I don't know. And then they're asking a bunch of questions and hoping you fill in the blanks. And that to me means that the signal is not clear and it's not working really well. Mm-hmm. When something is coming through super clear, it's like, and I've said this before, it's like the bird that flies across your windshield. It's like that is intuition. It's just boom, out of nowhere, and it comes fast. And it's like, So just the other day, I was talking with a medium here in the Chicago area, and it's kind of a funny story. She's very suddenly psychic and apprehensive about the whole darn thing. I mean, this is a woman who was in the carpool line waiting for her kids at high school in the Lexus SUV, and she starts hearing whispers in her ear, and she's like, what the heck is going on here? So she has this really vivid dream. It's actually kind of hilarious. This dream where an angel came to her and said, you are going to be told to read 3 books plus 1 more, and they will help you on your journey. So get the books. And so she woke up, and it was so clear that she just wrote it down in the little notebook by the bed. And then she forgot about it for a few days. She opened that notebook, and she saw that little message and was like, oh, gosh, that's right. I'm going to be told I need to read these books. So that day, her dog gets really sick. She calls the vet, and the vet is like, bring in a stool sample, which is always everybody's favorite thing to do, get a sample of your dog's dump. So she goes and does it. And she's sitting in the waiting room at the veterinarian's office, and this lady starts talking about my second book, I'm Spiritual, Damn It. They're reading it for book club. And she's going on and on and on about I'm Spiritual, Damn It. Da, 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 da. And the lady's like, wait a minute. This book is called I'm Spiritual, Damn It? I might actually read that one. And she said, yeah. And she said, you know what? You should read all 3 of Jenniffer Weigel's books, actually. Oh, and then get one more by this medium named Therese Rowley called Mapping a New Reality. And this woman goes, did you just say get 3 books plus 1 more? What? So she wrote down the names of all the books. She went and got them. She read them in a week, and she sends me this email. And I'm telling you, Patrick, I thought the lady was the craziest person. I mean, she's telling me about the vet's office and dog poop and books and angels and, what? I just thought, oh, no, another crazy person's emailing me. She ends up coming to a couple of my shows, and then I see she's like this totally normal suburban mom in an SUV. It's like, wow. And so I did feel bad for judging her before I met her, because I just went to this place, because I do get a lot of emails from people who are hungry to be discovered. They're anxious to get the word out about what they do, but I don't know that their intent is in the right place. Their heart might not be in the right place. If you're really in this to serve, and not in this to serve your ego, but to serve spirit or whatever you want to call it, source, then I think, you will fly. But those people that are like, look at me, I'm trying to prove something. It's just this ravenous sort of energy that I don't enjoy. And I judged this woman thinking that that's who she was before I got to meet her. And now it's really hilarious. We're fast friends, and she has come out full blown. Like 3 years later, she's a total medium. She's been doing readings now on house parties and public speaking, and, tells people she wants to write a book now about being a reluctant medium. And I'm trying to encourage her to do it, because I think we could all really develop this gift if we want to. It's like a muscle we have to work at. But if we want to develop it, and if we have the inkling, and, how about you? Did you have these sort of nudges when you were a kid and want to develop your psychic skills?
I became a paranerd later in life, I guess. It was less than a decade ago. And it was actually James Van Prague's Ghosts Among Us that I credit as being one of the events that kind of started what I've always called my spiritual shift. And so, now I'm obsessed with it, and it's become my passion, and I can't stop reading books, and I collect them all and completely obsess over that. And I've taken classes, psychic classes, and I've tried channeling, and what happens is I jumped into a lot of that stuff too early. I was just learning about the other side and getting actually a question I was going to ask you too is I was reading so many books about mediums because I was all of a sudden fascinated by it. And the little differences that some mediums will say, no, it's like this, or no, this is what happens. This is what the other side is like. And that would frustrate me. And I kind of got burned out for a while because I was like, well, what really happens? How can all of this stuff be true?
Right.
Do you ever find that you're like, man, is it all true, or are we all just making stuff up here?
No, it's so interesting because Thomas John has a funny answer about that. He's like, God loves Sylvia Browne, but she would say with absolute truth that there were these libraries and this is what they looked like, and giant towers and these gold books and all this stuff. And it's like, how do you know? And he says, look, what I know for sure and what the dead tell me is that the spirit lives on and they send us signs and signals. He likes to go with what they tell him for sure is true. Now, what your version of heaven is like, James Van Praagh is pretty adamant that, if you love to sew, you'll sew. And if you loved your Victorian house, you'll be in your Victorian house.
Uh-huh.
And, you create your afterlife very much like you liked your life. And then that there's this life review. That seems to be a through line everybody agrees with, that you sit and you watch your life flash before your eyes and you experience everything that you put out. So if you lived a life of love, your life review will be loving. And if you were a jerk and you killed people, then your life review will be hell. So that's really what hell is. It's hellish or it's heavenly based on how you lived your life. And so that's one thing that I think that people seem to agree on. But I've also interviewed a lot of people who have had near-death experiences. And I have an audiobook out on this now, just called Near-Death Experiences. And medical doctors some of them had near-death experiences, like Eben Alexander or Dr. Mary Neal from the book Heaven and Back. And so these people, it's really interesting. I have yet to meet somebody who had a near-death experience who had something like the gentleman I just interviewed. His name is Alan Stevenson. He's from Canada. And he had a heart attack on a bus. He was dead for 10 minutes, and he was in the light. But the spirit that greeted him was a tiger. And I'm like, well, that's a first. I've never known anyone to talk about a tiger coming through. So, I just love being continually surprised. And until we get there, we're not going to know. So for anyone to say with absolute truth what they know, I just kind of go, okay, sure. And some people who have died say they absolutely know. And I could see why they would say that, because they've died and lived to talk about it. So they still know more than I do. That's all I know.
I've always just wished that they would use more of a statement like, in my opinion. A lot of them are like, oh, no. This is what happens, dear. And I'm like, but this other person said it happens differently. I'm so confused.
Right. Yeah. It's, the only thing that they can seem to totally agree on is that there is no death and the spirit lives on.
Right.
So we'll start there.
Right. And I remember that, we were talking about at the moment when we started kind of being interested in this. I remember growing up with, organized religion and dogma and all of that and running away from that. And all of a sudden that moment that you read in a book that, okay, here's the truth.
Mm-hmm.
We're all going to the other side. And I remember after reading that in a couple of books, all of a sudden believing it. And it's just like a sigh of relief, that I could drop all that other stuff and learn more about it.
I interviewed a woman named Asia Voight, who is another near-death experience person. She survived a terrible fiery car crash. And it's really interesting, her story, because she was raised super religious. I want to say like Lutheran or something, mega Lutheran. And her mom was just, when she came back with her realization that there's no dogma and that there's no hell, and basically, Mom, we're all loved on the other side. And her mom was like, I can't even, she just couldn't wrap her head around it. She didn't have the experience of the near-death experience to change her belief system. And that's what I found through all this research, is the only thing that's going to get someone to change their belief system is an experience that rocks their world and changes their belief system. So, sometimes it's, a messenger that comes through with something and proof of something that is just so outside of your, usual box that you have to accept it, because how would they know this? And that is fun for me as I go through and do these events and see these shows. I was in New Jersey recently with Conchetta Bertoldi, who's chapter 5 in the book. And gosh, she's so funny. This lady wrote the best-selling book, Do Dead People Watch You Shower? And Dead People Walk Their Dogs. And apparently they do both. They walk their dogs and they watch you shower, but they don't care. They're not judging you singing in the shower or doing anything else in the shower because there's no judgment over there. But she did this event and, a couple hundred people there. And I'm watching her, a lot of it is men who are dragged there by their wives reluctantly.
Right.
I hate to say it,
Yep.
but it's 90% women at these things with the 10% men that are dragged, against their will. And you see the women are there and they believe, and then to watch the men transform and shift their grief based on what happens. It's just unbelievable. Conchetta walked up to this really loving looking man and he was just sitting there kind of with a simple smile on his face. And she talked about his wife and how Alan, the guy's name is Alan, and he talks to her, when even though she's on the other side. Conchetta said, your wife talks to you when you're in the closet. You guys talk in the closet. And I just watched his face, just kind of like the blood rushed into his face, and it was like he was alive again. And it was just neat. I really love to watch that and to see people transform.
Mm-hmm. My idea of a seance is sometimes a bigger umbrella term for lots of cool things that we can talk about. But have you attended a traditional seance?
So I have some concerns about that, actually, after the encounter with the Boudins. If you just chant and want to open yourself to any old thing, then you might get some energies that are not in the light. Because apparently there are a lot of stuck ghosts out there, and that's what a haunting is. It's a ghost that's not in the light. And so they're looking for attention. They're looking for a stage. They want to knock things over. They want to get you scared. They feed off of the fear. Now, it's a different thing if you're, lighting a candle in honor of Aunt Tilly and you want to send her love and hope that Aunt Tilly will come and give you messages. But, all the Boudins say, do not, by any means, do not get a Ouija board, because that basically is attracting those spirits that are lost and looking for a platform. And so I tell people, really be careful how you conjure, if you conjure, because you have to protect yourself with light. There is a lot of energy out there that is displaced, and that can be a very dangerous thing if you don't know what you're doing.
Right.
So to answer your question, I haven't done anything along those lines. I mean, when I went to Lilydale, which I'm sure you probably heard of Lilydale.
Yes, well, I'm jealous of that too.
Yeah, wonderful place. And I covered that in my first book. I took like 3 trips, I think, to Lilydale. Try taking a psychic to Lilydale. That was wild. But anyway, they have things where they do these services out in the, you're sitting in the woods and they're conjuring up, anybody and everybody. And I would just remember this horsefly not leaving me alone and biting me and batting my head. And it was like an evil spirit was taking over this horsefly. It was the worst, most evil horsefly. And I was like, get away. Ah! I swear there was a mean spirit in that horsefly. And I'll never forget it, because I was just sitting there unconscious. And James Van Prague actually said that to me the last time I saw him in person a couple summers ago. I asked him, I said, if there's one thing you wish everybody could know, if you could pick one nugget from all your books, I know that's impossible, but as a journalist, we try to narrow things down to 2 minutes or less. So what's the one thing you wish you could tell people? And he said, I wish people knew how much they absorbed from other people's energy fields when they're unconscious. So if you walk through a room and you're unconscious and a terrible fight had just taken place in that room, you will absorb some of that negative energy. If you walk through a plaza, like Daily Plaza here in Chicago, or, somewhere in New York, you go through a crowded hotel lobby and there's negative energy around, it will attach to you like lint. It's like taking one of those, lint rollers and you clear it off and then you roll it on the rug with the person who has 17 cats. That's what happens. Literally attract, like a magnet, all of that negative energy, unless you are consciously projecting light and a higher vibration, which is kind of work. He said, I take a light shower several times a day. I set my phone, I set my alarm, and I take light showers, and I think about that because we just don't know what we're unconsciously absorbing. If we're in line at the grocery store and suddenly we get a stomachache, it's because the lady behind us is yelling at her kid. We're absorbing that exchange. So you really have to be conscious about trying to put up the double-sided mirror if you're around toxic people, or projecting light from your heart, just like E.T. if you're around loving people. And I'm like, gosh, this is exhausting just thinking about it. And it is, but to be conscious, you have to be conscious.
What you're describing is exactly what I think of every time I go into like a Walmart or something like that, when there's always some crazy stuff going on and impatient people and cart rage. And I'm like,
totally. Oh my
the
gosh.
energy that I am picking up here is not good.
Yes. And you know what? Paul Selleck, who's chapter 6, I think, in my book, he was a channeler. This guy is so amazing.
Fascinating guy.
He was a professor at NYU. Yeah. NYU professor for 25 years, got his master's at Yale, starts channeling, I think 9 spirits at a given time. He transcribes them into books. I think he's on his 5th book now. The Book of Truth is his latest. And, he says, I'm not an author. I'm a transcriber. I just, I'm a channeler. But Nightline did this huge piece on him, and they call him the love psychic because he helped Sammy Hagar from Van Halen with his love relationship. So, of course, the media, the mass media, has to label it something they think is going to sell.
Mm-hmm.
So now Paul Selleck is the love psychic. So whatever. But he does so much more. And he told me that the guides tell him that love and fear cannot coexist. They simply can't. They're in different floors of the building. I mean, it's not possible. They're different vibrations. So they're not going to be anywhere near each other. So if you're in fear, then that means love has left the building, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you're only in judgment if you're, in fear, right? You're only in anger if you're afraid. Fear and anger are one and the same. So for all those people who claim that they are God-loving people, but they're judging everyone who's not like them, then they are in fear. They're not in love. Jesus is love.
Mm-hmm.
They're nowhere near Jesus if they're in judgment, because that's fear. And that one really stuck for me. I thought about that because it's like anytime you're afraid or you're angry, you can't then go pet a puppy and be like, oh, what's up? Oh, my goodness. You're not going to be in that receptive space. You're just not.
And sometimes I wonder how, when you're getting some kind of intuitive feelings, those gut feelings, and that turns to fear. I'm like, how do I not have fear if I'm getting intuition to be fearful or that something's going to happen,
Yeah, no kidding.
That's deep.
It's no, it's true. It's like, honestly, I think about that a lot because, that acronym, false evidence appearing real, fear, and people say, oh, don't be in fear, it's false evidence appearing real. Yeah. But guess what? If a car is coming right at you in traffic, you have a right to be in fear. I mean, that's not false evidence. Or you're standing in the middle of the street, someone's going to hit you.
Fight or flight.
I'm acting up. Help. Yes, exactly. So basically, I feel like it's this dance that we do because we're human, right? I mean, it'd be great if we could all be flying around like angels in love all the dang time. I mean, I know a couple people that are super loving all the time. I don't think they've ever gotten mad at anybody. And I'm just like, what is your secret? I don't think, Grigio. I really don't. I'm like, I don't know what you're doing, but you're doing something and I want to know what it is. And actually, one of them I'm thinking about, she's so happy all the time. And she really is truly believes in God. She just has a knowing, and she hasn't even had a near-death experience. She has a knowing that there's something bigger going on. And that is how she rolls. It's pretty amazing. And then the other woman I met that's like that actually did have a near-death experience, Dr. Mary Neal, who wrote the best-selling book To Heaven and Back I mentioned earlier. She glows out of her eyeballs like heaven is right behind her eyeballs. It's unbelievable. So I guess when you go there, some of it rubs off.
Yeah. It's a good thing.
Yeah, that's a great thing.
So I would do, honestly, a cartwheel right now if I could talk to Tyler Henry, the Hollywood medium. Do you have some mediums that you're just dying to talk to? Who's on your list?
You know what? I'm glad to say that I've met all the ones that were on my wish list.
Oh, cool.
And I do want to meet Tyler, and but I have to tell you also, look, there's so many unbelievable great mediums that are unknowns too, right? I mean, He's got the microphone right now because he's got the show on E, and Teresa's got the show, of course, the Long Island medium, and so everybody's, talking about her. But what really gets me excited is that woman, the reluctant medium that I met, the carpool mom, the unknowns that are just phenomenal and have great gifts, because I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but I was recommended this medium. I was recommended to go see this person, and he has a great reputation. And I didn't cover him in the book because he doesn't have a book. So that was, the one thing, but he still has a wonderful reputation, has been doing this for decades. So I sat down with him really open, absolutely open, and got absolutely nothing. I mean, donut hole. Not one thing that this guy said for an hour resonated. Mm-hmm. And I was just so disappointed. I'm like, golly, that stinks.
Yeah.
Well, shoot, But I would love, who I haven't met in person is John Edward. And because he's I feel like he's one of the veterans that kind of, the pioneers, if you will, that kind of started things going. And it would be nice to have a conversation with him just about how things have changed so much over the decades that he's been doing this. And does he still find the joy in it the way he did when he was working out of his home at $75 a pop? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
How about you, other than Tyler?
Well, Tyler he fascinates me. I think it's so interesting how it's dangerous to Google any medium online because, the word fraud pops up for every one of them. And there's people that are going to say they're fake.
All full of it.
Every one of them, doesn't matter. But he is so polarizing. I talk to so many people who think he is really has like a facade or is like not real or not, I don't know. And I see it and I completely just see this sweet person who is nothing but genuine. And I see the complete opposite in some people. And the episodes are just truly amazing. And I know things are produced, but I'm just like, wow, I want to talk to him. But I get what you're saying because I've also talked to several other pretty much unknown mediums who are doing super cool things, or local mediums around here that have all kinds of things going on and doing cool stuff.
Right. Well, I have to tell you, I met a healer in St. Louis when I was just there last week that I want to bang the drum about because it was life-changing. My brother is a newscaster in St. Louis, and he works on Fox 2. His name is Jenniffer Weigel. And so when I went to do a couple of book events recently in the St. Louis area, he said to me, Jen, I know this is your thing, so I made an appointment with you with this healer that I heard about. And I'm like, wait, you heard about a healer? Are you feeling okay, buddy? Like, what do you mean you heard about a healer? And so he arranged it. Her name is Johanna, and she's from Guatemala, and she works at this mind, body, spirit place, and it was really, really something. She put me down on the table, and I'm like, well, what is this? Is it going to be cranial sacral, acupuncture, energy work, Reiki, mediumship? What's the deal? And it was sort of a combination of all of it. She's a psychic medium and also a medical intuitive and can look at your body, and she was zoned in right where I was feeling extreme pain in my left kidney. And I didn't even say a thing.
Wow.
And she just put her hands right there, and it was like, here we go. She's like, oh, I got this. Hold on. We got to work this out. You got some fear, kidneys associated with fear, and she just nailed it. I mean, I was blown away, and I got off that table, and I'm telling you, Patrick, not a pain since. Not a pain since.
Wow. Shout out to Johanna.
Yeah. So that was pretty cool. And again, she doesn't have a book. She's not, John of God in another country. She's working, her grandma, I guess, apparently told her that the gift has been in the family for generations. It's been passed down and And so here she is doing her thing in St. Louis, and it's really cool. And nobody really outside of the St. Louis area knows about her. I want to help change that. But that's so exciting to me that there are these practitioners, in the nooks and crannies of the world that we can go and find.
I'll have to look her up. St. Louis representing.
Yeah, completely.
Nice.
Yeah, for sure.
So I'll let you lump the next three things kind of in a final segment here. And that is, I want you to talk about your podcast, which I've totally been digging through like 10, 12 episodes of. I'm Spiritual, Damn It. Awesome title. Which, by the way, has been a stage play, correct?
Yes, I took sort of like the best hits of my first book, and before I came out with my second book, and had a stage play. It was a one-woman show. It was so much fun. It was a lot of these stories from my road trips, talking to mediums and healers and psychics, because you can't make this stuff up. And so, yes, and then the podcast, as I mentioned, a bunch of them have been put into audiobooks. So the conversations with all the people that are in my book are now in an audiobook. But there are still some incredible conversations in the podcast, with, like I just mentioned, that Alan Stevenson guy, Paul Selleck, Asia Voight. There's just a lot of them to scroll through. I've been doing it, I started that a year ago, February. So even like a money manager who's holistic, because this one lady, Julie Casterly Murphy, really, really cool. She is a money manager, and she believes if we're stuck, like we aren't manifesting the kind of abundance, that we should go get a past life regression, because chances are we got issues in our mindset about money and we need to clear that out of our energy field. And I'm like, okay, well, and apparently it's working for her clients. So there you go. It's all connected.
And don't get me started. You've even done stand-up, haven't you? You crack me up. I've done my research on you.
You have done your research. I think that part of what I do and what makes me different than a lot of the other writers out there in this space is my sense of humor. Because if you can't laugh, even when you're in a tragic state, what's the point,
Right.
And that's just how I'm wired. And there's so much great content in all these stories. And people have said to me, you should make this a show. So I made it a show. And I was like, you should do stand-up. I'm like, oh, okay. Wait, you mean I only have to talk for 5 minutes? I've talked for an hour and 15. 5 minutes is nothing, I can do that. So it's all, I tell people, here's what I am. I'm a storyteller, and the venue changes. Sometimes it's on the radio, and sometimes it's on TV, and sometimes it's on stage, and sometimes it's in my writing. But I love to tell stories and move people through stories, because that's actually how the Bible was compiled. It was all stories that were passed down through generation after generation after generation. And I'm really grateful to some storytellers in my family. My dad was a great storyteller. My uncle, Tony, honestly, the best storyteller I have ever seen. And I would just sit at the table on Thanksgiving and Christmas and listen to Tony weave a tale and do the different, voices for each character. And it was just amazing. And that, I am grateful, was my influence growing up. And so I try to get my son to turn off the electronics whenever we're having a meal together. It's a no electronic thing. Everybody sit. Everybody tell a story. How was your day? Highs and lows. Tell me what worked today, what didn't work today. Because if we don't have that communication and actual exchange of energy, we're doomed. I honestly interviewed somebody for the Chicago Tribune back when I was, a columnist, and I interviewed an FBI expert who was an expert on lying and, how he could detect when people were telling the truth or not. And he told me that 7% of what we do in an exchange is the words, right? And the other 93% is the energy, facial expressions. That's if you're like in person with somebody. So the words you hear, 7%. The other 93% is energy and inflection and eye contact and body language. And so that stuck for me. That's pretty interesting. And then he also said, if you're reading an email, imagine only 7% is the words. The other 93% is your filter and your mood in that moment. So if you're reading a text that says, I'll call you later, and you're in a bad mood, all you hear is, I'll call you later. But if you're in a good mood, it's like, I'll call you later. And so we translate things and we make things mean something that they don't. It's really too bad, but that's how it is.
So we can totally get your book, I'm sure, every place that you can get any other book in the world.
Yes.
And that is Psychics, Healers, and Mediums, a Journalist, a Road Trip, and Voices from the Other Side. And there will be links and stuff in the show notes. And it's JennWeigel.com. And do you have any final thoughts?
I guess one thing I would love for people to start doing, and this is a challenge that Dr. Mary Neal posed to me when I met her, the heaven and back lady, the surgeon who died, whose eyes look like heaven. She said that if you start taking note of all those coincidences, like really document them, either on paper or like I do it on Facebook and Instagram. Whenever I see a heart-shaped thing, I document it right away, because as soon as you document it, she says, that's like putting a flare up to the universe that you're tuned in. And then the messages will flood into you. And that the law of probabilities wouldn't be able to explain how often it happens. And so when she challenged me with that, the day that I met her, April 13th, 2012, because I remember it very vividly. It was the day before my son's Star Wars party, because it was his birthday the next day. And she posed that question to me, and I have never looked back, because the next day I saw a mud-shaped heart, like a blob right in the first stare. And it was just like, whoa, is that a heart shape? And so the journey began. So I ask all those who are listening now, just start taking note of those little coincidences and see if they start happening as much as they're happening for me. It's so much more fun than just not paying attention in your day.
And then listen to that one random episode and give up sugar. That was my
Oh, yeah.
that was my heart shape right there.
There you go. That was yours. And that's the thing, too. Dr. Ian Smith, who is from Celebrity Fit Club and has a bunch of best-selling books, when he said, diet soda there's formaldehyde in that, okay? That's what they use to sanitize tools for operating. So you don't want that in your system. And the sugar that's in soda is so toxic to your body. It basically, it registers like if you're using drugs. It's the same happy place goes on in your brain. And we get addicted to it so easily. So he challenges people to just give that up. So start slow. But gosh, you are such an inspiration that you just cut it out completely and put the honey in place of the Splenda. So I hope you keep it up, my friend. That's awesome.
Last important question. Have you met Oprah?
Yeah, I interviewed Oprah.
Oh my gosh! How cool was that?
When I worked for, it was WGN then or CBS? I can't remember, but it was for the movie Beloved, and she was in the movie Beloved, of course.
Oh my gosh.
And yeah, I interviewed her, and you know what? She puts her pants on one leg at a time, and that's the one thing also, is that whether you're, the custodian in the building or the CEO or Oprah or Angelina Jolie or, your gardener, we all put our pants on one leg at a time, and we're all just as important on the other side when you get to the light. They aren't looking at your resume. They're looking at how you treated others. And so, some people might have an incredible resume, but they might treat people really poorly. And we have to, kind of keep that in mind as we go through our day. Resumes don't matter in the light.
You rock. Thank you, ma'am.
So do you.
You're listening to the Big Seance Podcast with Patrick Keller. Look for us on iTunes and be sure to check out BigSeance.com for more discussion.
Welcome to Spectral Edition. I'm Tim Prossel. I have a handful of ghost reports that aren't really haunted house stories so much as haunted individual stories, haunted person stories. They often take place in a house, and they're often about relatives confronting the ghost of a relative. But they just don't take on the usual haunted house story where several families move in and out and they move out because there's a ghost there. These feel much more individual and much more family-oriented, as if somebody is still grappling with the difficulty of going through a death of a relative, and that has something to do with why the ghost appears. Here's an example. It's from the Evening Star, a newspaper from Washington, D.C., and it was published on March 17th of 1879. Reads like this. A Maryland ghost. Queenstown, Maryland, has a genuine ghost sensation. Mrs. Nanny DeCourcy, who is staying with Mrs. Sally Harris, in response to a knock at the front door late in the evening, opened the door and found herself standing face to face with the ghost of Mr. William Sterrett, Mrs. Harris's nephew, who died some months ago. Mrs. DeCourcy was startled, but not frightened. She did not speak, but the ghost beckoned, and she followed it to the foot of the stairs leading to the room that was Mr. Sterrett's. Here the ghost vanished. The room Sterrett occupied while living had been locked ever since his death, and the key was in Mrs. DeCourcy's possession. But the door was now found to be open, and the bed tumbled. As I say, that doesn't strike me as a haunted house story so much as a more emotional story, Mrs. DeCourcy's ghost, rather than the house's ghost. I've got one more. It was published on January 13th of 1904 in the Lewiston Evening Teller, a newspaper from Idaho. The headline reads, Father's Ghost Haunts Son. Residents of Cumberland, Illinois believe in apparition. In Cumberland County, Illinois, about 3 miles from the village of Montrose, there is an old log cabin that the people believe to be haunted. The house was formerly the home of Thomas Eliot, who before his death vowed to return in spirit and haunt his son, who had offended him. Many brave and honest men have spent the night in the cabin and have told weird tales of the happenings. Chairs and other furniture would be moved about, strange noises would be heard, and all of the men would flee in terror. The son is no more able to explain the antics of the ghost than are his neighbors. Neither can he escape its visits. Once he moved to Mattoon, hoping to avoid the unpleasant visits, but the supposed ghost followed him. He moved again, but his change of location was no bar to his uncanny visitor. Finally, he gave up and went back to his old home. If he is in any way concerned with the ghostly apparitions, his magic is so artful that no one has been able to detect it. One night last summer, a party of 35 residents of that section went to spend the night in the house, but before morning, all had been frightened away. That's an interesting one, because while others do see the ghost isn't confined to the house, it's haunting that poor miserable son. I'm Tim Prossel, and you've been listening to Spectral Edition. I have more than 300 of these ghost reports, and I post one each Wednesday on my website, The Merry Ghost Hunter. I also have previously released audio versions of Spectral Edition available there, along with a lot of other things. It's all at The Merry Ghost Hunter, MERRY. Give it a Google and stop on by.
Thanks for joining us for the Big Seance podcast. We'd better get back to the table while there's still some candlelight left.
Hello, Patrick. This is Susan from Australia. Just wanting to give you the feedback that I love your podcast. Thank you.
Hi, Patrick. My name is Tim Shaw. I'm a longtime podcaster. I just wanted to give you a call and tell you that your show is great. Good production values. It's tight. You have a great personality for it. And I just want to thank you for putting it out there. I was on CBS radio for a while. I was on the internet for a while. I've been on a couple network shows. And perhaps someday I'd love to interview you for my latest podcast, which is called Curiosity. And we're just starting out with it. And we've got Nick Groff that we're just interviewing for the next episode. But also we got a video arm. It's called Curiosity, as original as it is. And you can see it at www.SeanThomasProductions.com. But besides all that, I just want to let you know that all your hard work hasn't gone unnoticed. And I've been doing this over a decade, and you've done a great job. So thank you very much. You have a wonderful evening. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Susan and Tim. I love when people send audio in because I love adding your voice to the show. I was so moved and honored to get that from Tim Shaw, and I totally accepted his invitation to be on his new show. So I'll keep you posted about that. Thank you, Tim. Well, here's some other listener feedback. Through my inbox, I got a sweet message from Linnea, who says, I've been listening every single day since I found it. Just had to start all over again. I think it's really fantastic how you present the podcast. You're an exceptional host. I've been missing that warmth with all the previous podcasts I've listened to. Thank you for that. Love from Sweden. Well, I tried to impress Linnea with my knowledge of Sweden being the land of ABBA. She made sure to let me know that Sweden is home to lots of folklore and ancient magic, too. Thank you, Linnea. I also heard from Pamela from Pacific Coast Spirit Watch, and I got to talk to her a bit. And I heard from Linda, who had a great guest idea. And I wanted to send a shout out to Kathy Hansen, who has been keeping us entertained in the parlor recently. And she's been enjoying her brand new Big Seance coffee cup from the Paranerd store at BigSeance.com. Now on to some iTunes reviews. In the U.S. iTunes store, Maybe Wrong says, great, this show is fantastic. That's awesome, and I hope you're not wrong, Maybe Wrong. I got another review in the Canadian iTunes store. Yay, Canada! Odium Malice, I think it's how you'd say it, says, great podcast. I love it so far. You even have a pleasant voice to listen. The Madame Delphine Lalaurie episode was fantastic. Your guest was amazing. I love her. I think we should all be best friends and hang out in cemeteries. That sounds great. Odium Alice. I could hang out in cemeteries every day of the week. My last shout out goes to our good friend of the show, Karen A. Dahlman, who was kind enough to recommend the Big Seance podcast for a feature on Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie. The producer got a hold of me, and on Monday night, May 22nd, indeed I was featured. They played a clip from my Uri Geller interview, and I got to talk to George Norrie live. It went by pretty quick, but it was very cool. And now I guess I can say that I've been on Coast to Coast AM. Woohoo! So thank you, Karen. And thank you, George Norrie and producer Tom, for inviting me on. All right, so listen, if you would like a chance to win a free copy of Jenniffer Weigel's book, Psychics, Healers, and Mediums, courtesy of the publisher, here's what you need to do. First of all, sorry, but since I'll be shipping the book, you must reside in the U.S. But if you do, make sure you're a member of the Big Seance Parlor group on Facebook. Find the post where I announce the drawing and reply and let me know that you want the book. Any person in the parlor who replies to that post will be entered in the drawing. And I'll give you at least a week to do that. One winner will be randomly chosen, and I'll send you the book. So there you go. Thanks for listening to the episode. I love all of my paranerds. I'm going to skip the paranerd hashtag this week because you know what? This episode's long enough, and I don't want your heads to explode. There's lots of details here. We'll do another one soon. Sorry, Lena and John. Peace out. For show notes, including links to anything we may have mentioned in this episode, visit BigSeance.com. Just click on the Big Seance podcast logo or find it in the menu. You can also find and subscribe to the show in iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music, TuneIn Radio, and iHeartRadio. Do you have any comments or feedback? Go to BigSeance.com/feedback to learn how to get your voice in a future show. Or you can call my feedback line, 7755-TELL-ME. That's 775-583-5563. Interested in learning how to promote and share the podcast? Go to BigSeance.com/share. Thank you so much for listening. Unfortunately, it's time to blow the candles out, but we'll see you and light them again next time.
Did you just call me ma'am? Now.
Is that horrible? I'm sorry.
Rules? You have to say miss. Even if I'm 100, call me miss. You got me?
Well, here's the deal. I teach middle school, and every one of my students is sir and ma'am, and they're younger than me. So it's
just being polite. Okay, got it. No, I'm telling you, I can have my day made when the guy at Starbucks calls me miss instead of ma'am. It's the little things in life these days. But anyway, okay.